Hey,
Well,
so, yeah, I think the general plan for today is to continue with the Voros paper, and if we wanted to go over our ISPSM paper stuff too, we can. I don't know how much where Amanda is with that. I don't have anything interesting to show. It's actually been going on my mind quite a bit, and I looked again at the paper, the coding metaphor paper, and that's a really good paper.
Okay,
that
good.
seems really um, like it points out a lot of points I actually um, had in mind as well, and some of it really like expands upon them really well. So that's good. I also saw the one that you got brother too, which is also good. I'm really curious to see like the full paper. It looks like it's sort of not really um, finished yet, but but yeah, that was good. So I'll get into that, but I feel like I knew we were in the middle of Laura's paper, and there's some follow up in the other ones. I only got to read a little bit of the coding metaphor paper, but that's definitely something for the group. Like that seemed like a really rich paper for at least from what I've seen so far. I feel like sometimes even in here there's been kind of like the that thing the meme where it's like you start of the semester and end of the semester, like start the dissertation and the dissertation or whatever. And it's not quite as mm, like the last paper I was kind of the Peters paper or whatever that guy's name was. It was a little different, but anyway.
I guess in terms of my ISPSM update, I did put most of my notes into a Google Doc, and that's what I shared in my Slack channel HQ. So a step forward, but I guess I'll keep working on it. But it's in a state where you could comment on it. No pressure, but like any just like I would appreciate even low effort comments of like, oh, this reminded me of this, or I don't know what you mean here. And obviously there will be a lot of places where you don't quite know what I mean because they're messy notes. But I guess, yeah, I shared that. I'll keep working on it.
is there a specific format you'd like to have the notes in, like a dash or stars or something? Because
no.
Okay.
I guess just it's in a Google Doc, so there's that commenting tool, or yeah, this is just like a note stock of everything, so it can be scribbled on.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that should be before Saturday. I should have that out. That's basically my own doc. I meant to put it in the doc, but I have it. And then so good for you. That's a good start.
Let's start.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other? There's been a few things just in the Slack, and things that have come up. Cybernetics stuff as well. Halloween, yes. Oh yeah, did people like dress up or do anything or get a bunch of trick or treaters or?
No.
I attempted a few things. I'll be like the most minimalistically festive and reveal part of my costume later at an unexpected time, just to make it arbitrarily entertaining. I tried to do. I had one idea for a costume, and it was way too warm this last weekend here, so I kind of did a really modified version of it. But yeah, this was a really interesting thread that I didn't get to read, but it's basically like what happened to cybernetics in China, like Eastern take on things. And I think this paper, which paper is this one here that you posted? Um, and I'm kind of, yeah. Get that here.
Yeah, that's for next week.
Yeah, this is for the read. This is for Levin's reading group, so we can scientific commodity. I feel like I looked at this too. There's been a lot of really interesting things, and kind of what I like to do. It kind of fits into the um, it kind of fits into the space of um, project development, although it's more. I've had to, if we get to it. You can't see I'm pointing at this whiteboard. There's some macro project stuff I'd like to talk about, but it's not. It's kind of let's say embryonic. Like that feels like a loaded word in this group of people. It is in a very early stage of coherency, but you guys will get what I'm saying. I'll try to be bright. I put like like a 5 to 10 minute flash talk presentation cap on it. Hard limit of no more than 10 minutes when I start talking about it, but I do want to kind of mention it. I'm going to aim for 5 and probably go over. Um, yeah. So let's put here. Okay. Like I mentioned to Bradley in passing. Like, oh, I'm thinking of restructuring something in JoePro, and Bradley was like, oh yeah, I've heard about JoePro in a while, and yes. Okay. I'll say Slack review just to have this here. Um, okay, this is in the reading group hub. Okay, and I was looking through here. Memory points. This was. Can you see in beings? Thank you for that. Okay.
Yeah, I like the thumbnails.
Um,
What thumbnails?
For the YouTube videos
Oh yeah,
of
yeah.
our reading group.
Oh, a fun update. I really hope I can talk about this Saturday. Pleasantly, very surprised by my. I'm taking like the intro courses for the master stuff that I'm doing, and in the intro course is when it was like a basic like Python and data encoding and data science stuff. But they have a whole week dedicated to data ethics. And I actually kind of am so used to people less than half-assing that discussion that I actually missed that our homework was having multiple discussions about it. And I'm like, okay, where's like the regular coding problem? Like, no, they actually just said, no, we're having a discussion. They're actually really surprised with that. And they had some good things too, like this video about data scientists 60 minutes covers some really interesting topics, including, and note for later, including there was a very interesting point, not subtly, but very quickly made about how the sort of Western and even American tilt towards quantification as being the predominant thing to measure and make judgment from, and how that's different in terms of other parts of Europe, or other studies, and like the merits of different kinds of things that aren't just what can we quantify. And it was like one or two sentences, and I think it was in this the six minutes of data science, six data science ethics in 6 minutes, and it was just sort of a nice like fun to see there. And then this was I think this paper was mentioned either in that video or related, but um, you know, a look at it's an older paper, but I think it's somewhat of a Boyd and Crawford are sort of known in that space, and um, like they did a good they surprised me, especially for an introductory course that's not on data ethics to spend like they gave it an actual effort, and I applaud. Good job, uh, UC San Diego's data science program for like doing that. Like I'm legitimately surprised because almost every other time I've seen it come, it's been kind of not taken quite as seriously as I'd like it to be. So that's cool. So that's here, and I do actually want to kind of. It's quite fun to see this, and as well as maybe I can reference this too in the same note. There's been a few interesting things here. Um, like Cording is doing this community for rigor stuff, and it's sort of on reproducibility and whatnot. There was something else here. This is Bradley's link to the other one. And another methods thing here too about brain decode, which is to be continued later. Anyway, it's not quite what I wanted to find. I want to try to keep moving here, so I apologize for these sort of random updates. Society ethics tech was a big surprise. Cybernetics. Okay, this paper was the one we just linked. This paper was this. Towards an ontology for third generation systems thinking. I don't know if you want to say anything really quickly about that one or just talk about it later. I know you posted that.
Oh, so this is one of the people from the Active Inference Lab, and he's a software engineer. And it looks like an interesting thing, given what we were talking about last meeting, sort of like, or the last human use of human beings meeting, where we were talking about maybe, how cybernetics needs some sort of ontology or some sort of like new set of definitions or new cast for what's going on, because we kind of use these value-laden terms, and we have these kind of concepts that are it's good, but it's not really useful in some ways to getting it to moving it forward. And so I don't think he actually defines an ontology here, but I think he does introduce systems thinking in terms of a more general concept of systems thinking. So systems thinking is pretty wide ranging. There are different schools of thought. They all kind of revolve around this idea of, collect or like emergent behavior, collective phenomena, different aspects of that, not just looking at single relationships or necessarily single, even causal relationships, but many things interacting. And so, he kind of gives this this view of multi-level nested interacting systems in their environment, in the boundaries between systems and environment. So those are all topics that people kind of hit on in different ways in the different schools of thought. And this is a nice paper. There are many other papers that kind of get into some of these things, but I think that's something that isn't easy. It isn't an easy area to sort of master, because there's so many different strands of thought that people have developed somewhat independently. And so it would be, good to go dig into that area. Like I said, with we talked about at Saturday's meeting about dynamical systems, and how we maybe need some materials for that or some guidance and how to, you know, cut through the noise there and sort of get at some educational resources and key concepts. I think systems thinking is also part of that because there's a lot of sloganeering sometimes in systems thinking. Like people say it's a multi-level system. What does that mean? Or interactions. What do interactions mean? And so yeah, I think this is definitely a good paper to read. But there's this kind of opens the window to another domain, and
Okay. That's definitely uh and this is probably something to say for Saturday. Um,
yeah.
but what am I? Um, oh, um, okay. That was Cognition Futures. Let's just see what else here. Oh, yes, great share here. This is the Michael Roberts paper that also looked quite interesting. So this could be on the docket as well. Um, let's actually do this. Um, uh,
On returning to it, I don't think that would be the best reading group paper. Um, it sounded like my notes, I think, are decent, but it just wasn't as interesting as I remembered it being. There's just so many other good things on the docket of potentials that I want to downvote that one
okay.
since it was my own suggestion.
I'm just trying to keep because I know.
What was the
Yeah.
name of that one? That was phenomenological constraints. Okay.
Yeah, so it seemed cool. I guess it's kind of it fits into this paper why I thought it fits into the paper we're discussing from Voros, like why exactly I was disappointed in it, because Voros talks about how there's only so much you can uh, theorize about. There's only so much you can do, just like writing and theorizing, and that ultimately, Varela's position that is like what is needed is practice, and just like start, lay the path in walking or whatever. And then this paper that sounds really interesting from Roberts seems to just get lost in the theorizing. I very quickly just became like uninterested, and he started saying things that just didn't make any sense. And
Oh, yeah.
so I don't know, it just started like playing the philosophy game. It was responding to a particular view also. So it was like, it's fine. I'm not saying it's a bad paper, but it's not the most useful. And yeah, I guess that's it. And
Um,
apparently I already read it and took and took notes, so I
Yeah.
guess I don't need to go back to it.
well, I have to say, and I don't want to. I realize I'm reaching here, I guess, but this interview for Varela has been on my mind like
Mm.
constantly. Like all the different points that were like the things that were said and the things that were kind of implied. Like I wish I could have heard. I need to get more visual. I wanted to want to get like I'm sure there are. There, I just haven't seen a lot of them. Varela speaking and the way he would emphasize stuff. Like I want to get a sense of really build out my embodiment of my theory of mind of what he is and how he says stuff. This is not happening at all.
Yeah, I guess
Because
I've never listened to him speak.
um, I have a few friends from Chile, and I was very close to someone from Chile, and like, and also like, uh, um, an OG Society Ethics Tech member Valeria uh, was is from Chile, and the way I hear some of how she talks about stuff and through like Western thought and stuff. I actually sent her his kind of quip about stuff, and it was like I'm starting to appreciate um I don't know, that multicultural context in terms of everything we're talking about, but also like I really want to see like, man, like I have this kind of image of Varela as this kind of, I don't know, something about the interview was surprisingly humanizing for me in a way that I didn't really get to see him talk before. That's been on my mind a lot. I want to spend all day on that. I could, but I don't want to. Okay, this stuff here. Um, Code paper. This brain is a survey paper. The brain is a. Let's just mention this here. Whoops. Uh, so okay, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. Just want to go through this stuff and put it out here. Okay, so I'm putting myself on the clock right now. Ideally, 10 minutes or less. Hard limit. As hard as Let's go. I'm not really ready to go through this. I don't want to make it super big. I think I'm going to keep it small and discreet and talk about it rather than show what it is and not be embarrassed about it. Suffice to say, what I've done is
It's not very legible. Could you expand it or?
no, I'm gonna keep it illegible. I'm always just gonna put it off the screen for the time being. I'm gonna miss out. And I'm gonna say this because and maybe I'll show it if I can get to it, but I'm trying to be very concise, and I feel like okay, so why here? Mm, I'll write it here. I'll make myself write it down, I guess. Um, so we're now in the project development zone. Jesse, person studies. Oh my god, I can't wait to change that name because I don't like it, but it's the best thing I got right now for this. Um, but also um, I've done, yeah. So I've done a lot of thinking about what am what am I trying to do personally, and what am I trying to do? Uh, Not to be like too meta weird, like referencing like Fuchs and Rella and internal and external stuff, but like I have to make some of my stuff second person available. Like I have to make things in ways other people can interface with and read, interact with. We talked a lot about uh, uh, make a website for the project stuff, and it's kind of been like, okay, what is that for me? And I'm not going to make a website. Well, maybe I will, but right now my take is like person studies. Uh, I don't want to make a website just for that, but like I'm trying to recreate a few things in my mind about what I'm trying to do here. Now, how does this relate to cognition futures and why I'm mentioning here at all is because I feel like cognition futures um, I don't have something very good to show for it. But I'm realizing um, like cognition futures in and of itself is a very nice, discrete project that has legs and momentum and people that care about it. And I'm immensely fortunate for that we have this here. And I've kind of been faced like, oh, should you make a cognition futures for all the different domains that you're actually interested in studying to do some like really big stuff? And obviously, Angela's no, I can't do that. I don't have the time. I'm doing a bunch of other stuff. I can't. I'm not like a tenured professor that can just. It's not tenable in any way for me. So what do I do in that sense? I've been thinking, okay, what I do want to do, because I have 6.5 minutes left, is in terms of, I want a structure that combines domains of inquiry and specific questions about them. And I think I'm going to make a something public facing within GeoPro because I want to keep it in that framework or whatever is easy right now. That will do that. Now, like, what am I like to try to give you guys more context, because you guys know me, but not everything. Like I've been calling it kind of awkwardly, uh, PHOS, philosophy and history of science. Uh, I've been talking a lot about, oh, I've got this. I'm interested in philosophy and history of science. I'm reading Karl Popper. Like, what's going with that? Well, there's things going on with that, and I'm trying to, I've been talking quite a bit about, oh, the pre-science and the shift to science, all this stuff. Okay, there's something for there. Um, there's like um, a lot of new models that remind me of sort of Avery's work and are kind of in conjunction to Avery's old work that I don't really know how to talk about, but there's sort of the stuff that I have to write out myself for some of like the personal weird theory work uh, that like I want to be informed by other things, but I know that I have to write out. Um, that's some stuff. Because we've talked a lot about like reimagining cybernetics, but also I kind of group that with sort of the question of what about Logiciel and Johann's work, Johann's investigation of that. A little bit maybe Friston and his, his stuff, which is very, I'm doing science in this way, and maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't. But like, there are certain things that I want to do in terms of really big, uh, like, you guys all know, we all know here that I'm kind of on the sense of I want to push. I have a certain issue with like the cognitive science project, and I kind of want to go. I'm evaluating where to go with it, and I don't like cognition futures in and of itself is this really important work into the methods project, and looking at the lineage right now, like it's kind of, if I wanted to say, we could take cognition future and say, oh, we're on the phenomenology futures. It could just be phenomenology futures research group, and I wouldn't be upset with that necessarily. It'd be like, what is this legacy of the first person, third person stuff, and where is it? We're looking at methods, but also the huge philosophical work of dealing with the first person and third person stuff, and doing that has led us into this big. By the way, there's these massive uh, weights on how and why science is done, and what science is, and what does it mean to have empirical data and measure this. So we've gone like there's a whole lot of stuff associated with that, and so it's kind of like I I'm at least dealing with this sort of personal. Here's what I found. Thanks so much. This sort of personal restructuring of, okay, what's the actual scope that I'm trying to do stuff in, but realizing that scope is quite almost like pointless to try to make anything public facing about that scope in a direct sense. But like, having a coherent project right now of like Cognition Futures is great. I want to make something a little bit more public facing that I can invite other people into philosophy and history of science stuff. A lot of the cybernetics or sort of math, like new ways of doing math related stuff. There's a few other groups and things too that I want to do, like I'm not here yet, but like intersectionality as critical theory. This has come up a bit. Also, since I have this here, remember the old the Reclaiming Cognition book, which is really, there we go, Reclaiming Cognition book by Nunez, which has Damasio and Varela also, I guess, comment on the book. But like, there's also, and similar, just up here, the I do want to. I'm really interested in the Jerry Fodor book, which is a book about him comparing his views to other views like Churchland and Bennett and Dawkins. A little bit less relevant, but more like I see myself. Okay, eventually I can write. In some years I see myself wanting to write a similar book about just juxtaposing where to, like I do appreciate that this book basically says, uh, he's locating himself against other things. Okay, don't be doing that. But in my limited time, oh my God, stop, Siri. It's like voice texting everything I'm doing. I guess you kind of get what I'm saying, but like I'm seeing that as I think about the future and think about 2024, which is very quickly approaching. Um, what does the structure of these things look like? And obviously, there's stuff on the lab, and I'm trying to really carefully differentiate what's the stuff, the junk that Jesse's trying to push forward in a certain direction, and what's like a natural fit for things to do in the lab. Like reimagining cybernetics like is super relevant, something that we've been waiting for a long time to do. And I see that as that's totally like an RL's thing, and I want to support that, but it fits with some other stuff broadly. But some of like the philosophy and history of science work, um, some of the stuff that's a little more like intersectionality, and some of the things that are evolving into, I don't know what to call it, but that space of, and kind of my paper gets into this space, but what is the normal for understanding a person's internal state, and what's sort of been marginalized and what's been labeled as the extreme cases, or like the cases that aren't normal, and what does that space look like, and how has it evolved, and whatnot, and what is that about? Like we've talked about that. I don't know how to articulately talk about what that is, but there's sort of there's different things here for that. So I guess what I'm saying is, um, and there's still the component of like Joe Pro as mentoring and putting into practice this, and also like the bigger uh, all these things about how do we do how do we do science differently, what Fuchs's inclusion aspirations, but all that stuff, and including like like sociological revolution or whatever needs to happen. Like there's something about all this stuff too. So there's movement on this front. I don't have anything really fun to show about it, but it's sort of like, how do I? And honestly, like in one sense, I'm really just talking about my own internal stuff, because the reality is I don't think most anybody will really interface with all of that stuff except me, in the sense of making these things tenable, groups, that tenable projects that other people can interface with in a way that's, nice. And I know Bradley and I've had many conversations about that over time. And again, appreciate that we have Cognition Futures that's doing like Cognition Futures in the domain of like the cognitive science stuff is sort of like my main thing, and probably will continue to be that. And it's sort of like, I know that I'm not going to really replace that, but what do I do with this other stuff? So I don't know. And I'm open to feedback and commentary about it. I'm going to try to present it better Saturday, but it's a bit where I am about it right now, because there needs to be some changes such that I can structure things a bit more and get other people to actually, either just me to do it, or ideally get some help in it. And also, I guess one other point is like, there are people that I mentioned or alluded to that are like really, really doing adjacent work that I basically want to either support if I can't do it myself, or kind of collaborate with them in some of these spaces. So having some of it's my own junk, but also like there's some stuff waiting in the wings to emerge when the space is there for it to come through. And so that's part of it too. But in the end, my time is up by a minute or two.
Oh yeah. So yeah, this is interesting. So I mean, one thing you can do is create like, a website and have like your. It's largely aspirational at this point. So you might have like my favorite approach is to have like a intro paper, an intro presentation where you can show people what you want to do and make it clear what the demarcations are. So you mentioned that you want to see kind of like the broad themes, but also some of the other work that needs to be done. So I don't know how you phrase that. You said something like domains of inquiry and then specific questions. So giving people an example of how that would be done is always good. Sketch it out a little bit, and then
Yeah,
having the things that exist now that you use as inspiration help, because it says I'm going to address the question this way. It's almost like a proposal type thing, but it's not. You don't have to. You don't have to deliver at this point. But you could host that as a website if that's something that you think would be useful, because that of course would allow you to show it to people, to have it public, get people involved. And then like another thing is you could write a paper or maybe a series of documents on how you might approach it. So make some decisions about how you want to approach certain problems. I know we talk a lot about things, and then I'm a big fan of then pulling the trigger and just trying something and see if it works. So just try to write something, and it doesn't matter if it's perfect. Just kind of put something together. People don't usually wait until they have the perfect framework. When you're doing like something like theory work, you may want to, you know, kind of focus on a specific thing that you're interested in and say, oh, that might be a good topic. It's not necessarily copying what other people have done. It's just making it more sort of, maybe it's making it more accessible. Sometimes it's taking a new twist on it and saying, oh, this is something that fits into maybe like, you said you're interested in how do you fit like something like phenomenology into cognitive science, or something like a model of personality into cognitive science. I mean, people have done that already, but you can take your own twist and put it on. And I think that would, even if it's like something as short as a blog post or something that would look like a blog post, that would be enough to get people saying, "Oh yeah, this guy's kind of serious about what he wants to do," and it gives people like concrete, something concrete to attach to it. So I mean,
Yeah,
I
it
wouldn't
seems
worry about perfection. I just worry about like getting something out there that looks reasonable. And
right. It seems like you have a really good idea of um the kind of work you want to like see done. Um, so my advice would be to like, yeah, lead by example and like start doing it. Like, yeah, explain your like values and the questions that you find most interesting by like talking about them and like tackling those questions. Um, and noting like where there's the need for collaboration, where there's need for more, but like note that and then keep going with what you are more like sure of. um I don't know, and if you just like I feel like I get caught, and it seems like this is what's happening here a little too, is like I get caught up in conceptualizing what I want the product to look like, that I can't like get going. If I'm like if I'm struggling with like figuring out the details of the final product, I can never even get started really, because then um I'm thinking of like my paper writing experience in philosophy as one example. Uh, I would just have to like start writing. Ultimately, it was the pressure of a deadline where I would just have to start writing, and then I would come up with something decent, and then in the end, I would have to like frame it, and say this is what I managed to do. And so obviously, when you're not like writing a philosophy paper on something you don't really care about, you're going to have a better product. But you still, I think, I don't know, this is advice to myself. You have to like just start moving, um, and then react to the obstacles you encounter, um, instead of like, yeah, tripping away towards like something very specific. Because I don't know, I personally find that much more difficult.
Yeah, and I hear you both, and I strongly agree. And I think a question, if you're open for spending another time with it before we do other stuff, is I I'm feeling a little tension between like there's certain there's certain like normative stances that I'm building, and like ideas about I want to make some new theories or perspectives or something that's very, very, I think we should do it this way because. And those things I am very cautious about. Those are very long term, like those are the top of the paper pyramids, like there's those are the very things I want to do. And I guess I'm kind of like I need to stay true to those sort of burning intuitions or desires to go in a direction because they're gonna take me through this stuff. However, I don't I'm kind of cautious about that space in particular. In the much more functional sense, um, getting like there's stuff here, like the stuff we're doing with phenomenology and ISPSM and everything in conditioned futures is in a realm of like we're dealing with stuff, we're dealing with ideas. Maybe we'll get to something that's actually experimental, getting our own data, processing it in the future, which would be awesome. But we're dealing with this like we're doing kind of the work as people trying to like do. I don't know how to say this, like not do the science, but like do something that's beyond just we're trying to do more than the philosophy game. I think maybe it's a bit of a stretch to say that, but we're at least having good faith efforts of trying to do more than the philosophy game. At least that's what I'm telling myself. And but it's sort of like I guess the question for you is like, how do you differentiate that? Because like ultimately, I think I'm going to have you know like I'll put it this way. There's a realm of things like last time we talked about Bradley and cybernetics, and we said something like, yeah, we want to do something with reimagining cybernetics. We want to kind of go with maybe a different ontology. We want to come up with some different ways of thinking, talking, and doing stuff. And we know if we make that paper and present it at Embodied Intelligence 2024, 25, whatever, people are going to disagree with it, tear it apart, and say, "Oh, this is stupid. Anyone thought about this, whatever." And I feel like that's kind of a fun, appealing thing for me to think about. Like I don't mind that. Um, but it's sort of like that's taking some known stuff, and maybe it's just me and my comfort level. I feel really okay doing that in a way that I feel like there's something tenable and pushing forward, and it may be controversial, but it's more like controversial within a very obvious domain. And I feel like some of the stuff I want to do is like much more outlandish and bigger critiques of like bigger structures. And I want to do that, but I don't think that's um it's sort of tampering the ambition and then tampering the humility, and where in like the Dunning-Kruger Valley are you? And obviously knowing like the doing that project in a real results way is something that's like I think 20 years out for me. Like it's not a next year thing for me at all. But kind of balancing that. So I mean, this is maybe getting to like academic ambition therapy zone, and maybe we can table like we don't have to have this discussion now, but maybe Saturday we can talk about this a bit more, or like to be continued in this vein of like what do you do with that? Because like I had a slight anecdote. I had a really nice conversation and have a continuation of this with tomorrow with someone who's um, not really in any of the things I've listed here in this paper, but is doing work on like information and like the conceptualization of emotion and how research is done in certain ways. And I really admire that. And they're using their set of eyes and lenses that I don't have, and I want to find out what they're doing. In the very least, I want to like we kind of in effect are essentially they're essentially a Joe Pro mentee in sort of the research incubator sense or like vocation incubator sense. Whenever I list on here my slightly reorganized homepage, like this stuff, they essentially are this. Um, but like I I'm really careful because I want to say, yeah, do your stuff, and I want to help you do your stuff. But also, it's like I'm trying to be very open to saying I have a lot of ideas and directions the way I want to go with some stuff too. And so, like, how do I collaboratively help you do your thing, and say, like, I disclosed my feelings about it and my like where I'm going with it. But it's kind of like you know, I want to create a space that gives people uh, creating an intentional space for people to do the work and test the hypotheses and explore the stuff versus understanding that some of the stuff that I want to do is more like I don't know, like there are really serious arguments informing in different ways, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself, so we should probably move on
Yeah.
to other stuff.
Well, yeah, I think it's all things to think about.
It sounds like one like uh deliverable that would be particularly useful would be like a mission statement, a manifesto, a Joe Pro, a person studies manifesto.
And that's what I didn't show you is my list of.
Is that the whiteboard?
Oh, what was that?
I said, is the manifesto the whiteboard?
Kind of. And I was funny because I looked at the screen. I was like, I'm pointing to like CBNM and Judge Janet. I was like, no, that's not quite it. But like, yes, there's this. I have a list of, and I've made progress on them to different degrees. Like actual writings, almost like a foundation for a manifesto. And it's sort of like I want to balance. Here's my manifesto and kind of things I want to do with an understanding that it will change. Like I'm not saying there's a conclusion that I definitively know yet, but also like I'm really trying to make opportunities for people to do stuff in that space too. So it's kind of that tension. Anyway, sorry, I feel very self-absorbed in this. So let's move on to other things. And I appreciate the feedback and general support. So. Where are we now? Any other like new items or things people want to talk about of their own feelings or ideas before we go into a deep dive?
Nope.
I don't think so.
So we return to Sebastian Foros. Forus? Last we left off. Oh yeah. We were at 66. Like the owl of Minerva, which spreads its wings only at the onset of the dark, so conceptual articulation will have to wait for the dust of pragmatic toil to settle, and only then do its bidding. Such a poetic line.
Do you mind sharing it? I have it in front of me also, but it's easier when we're looking at the same thing.
The link?
The PDF, sharing your screen, sharing the PDF.
Oh, is it like focus on me? I'm not sure what I'm doing.
It's right here. It should be one of the windows in.
Oh.
Yeah, you can just blow it up and.
Mine wasn't updating. Mine was like stuck on. It wasn't until I clicked something that it switched.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
That was a me problem. Yeah. So that bit that I highlighted in the middle, that was like what I was referencing when I was criticizing that other paper I had found. It seemed like that paper was exactly trying to like forestall the practical synthesis of, first personal and third personal with these conceptual theoretical like quibbles.
And were you saying that, like, this highlighted part in the middle here?
Yeah, that's what I
Okay.
had in mind when I was talking about why I didn't like the other paper.
All right. And that is uh this is the end of 66, basically where we were. Um I I guess I'll kind of read this because it looks interesting, but then you can take the lead on this. Berlin notes that neurophenomenology draws on previous work, which he with Thompson and Rausch developed embodied mind stuff. Uh, differs from the prevailing computationalist, even the somewhat renegade connectionist approaches by insisting that the proper understanding of the mind requires not only a proper understanding of the workings of its neural substrate, but also its organismal embodiments and embeddedness in the natural environment. Um, Clearly, then, theoretical work does have a place in neurophenomenology. However, the main obstacle for Verla lies in the scientific practice, how science is and should be done. Uh, what will make or break I would say, phenomenology and neurophenomenology are not the theoretical speculations, but whether they can be appropriately modified, whether they can appropriately modify habits, practices, and norms of scientific community,
Yeah.
norms and habits of the scientific community. So, sorry.
Yeah, basically doesn't, it's just basically breaking through as like a view. So like, you have connectionism, you have cognitivism, and then you have this other approach. Can it like supplant those, or can it be competitive? And that's kind of the thing that I don't know if that's like the only thing. I mean, the theory itself, of course, to be taken seriously has to be reasonable, has to be something that people can get something out of. But, there is this aspect of like, having your ideas accepted by the larger community. So are people, I mean, because there are a lot of ideas out there that have like very small communities of practice, and, maybe, they just talk amongst themselves, and that's all well and good, but you have to have like some, you have to have some adoption, I guess. Um, and I don't know. I mean, like, he talks about, could we go back up to the first part of that section where he talks about the comparison right there? So basically, it's being contrasted. So embodied, situated, and active cognitive science, which is their sort of approach. So we know what embodied means. Situated and inactive, we know what those mean. We've talked about those. So that's an alternate approach. So they define embodied, situated, and inactive cognitive science. And again, cognitive is the term used because you have to say that. It's not like this is not necessarily like a cognitive approach. It's just that it's part of that area. It seeks mind and world as mutually overlapping. So the mind overlaps into the world overlaps into the mind, which is sort of, I mean, that's kind of what cognition is talking about. I mean, cognitive science is talking about in a lot of ways. I mean, you'll have like people say, well, we represent things in the brain, or we have, the mind is a computer that sort of stores things from the world, but they're more explicit about it. So this differs from computationalist and connectionist approaches. I don't know if renegade connectionist approach is like something that exists, but the idea that you have this computationalist approach where the mind is like computing things in the world, it's computing information or something, that we need to have. So the difference is that we need to understand what the brain is doing, as opposed to just computations, what it's doing, and then the organismal embodiment and its embeddedness in the natural environment. So we're embodying the neural substrate into something more. So there's a body, clearly we talked about that. And then embeddedness in the natural environment. So you have the world out there that interacts with the mind. So you have this brain that's explicit in terms of the neural mechanisms, not just in terms of the computation. You have this body that interacts. Maybe you can have sensory inputs, but they're sort of sculpted by the body, and then the environment, which is the outside world, and that can be like this sort of embedded aspect, where it's embedded in an environment or something like that. So those are the differences between traditional cognitive science and this approach. And I guess he's going to maybe make like some nasty comments about this as opposed to like cognitivism. I'm not really sure how this is going to go, but
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of say, and what do you see of that, Amanda? Like, do you know where it's going? But also, like, do you think, I don't know, what do you think of that?
Hmm. I think one kind of like theme of this paper is that what Varela is after is something much harder to understand than like the way that a lot of philosophers talk about all these terms, all the e's. Um, and I think that the part that like exemplifies what I'm talking about is later when he talks about this author talks about how like the body itself is in a sense one of these like generative passages between first personal and third personal. Um, and that's like a really like weird way to talk about embodiment compared to the rest of not just philosophy but like yeah cognitive science. um and I think I guess a connected but separate thought is that what one thing that people are after when they want to talk about how to like unify the cognitive sciences, and we talk about having a common language between these disciplines. There's a sense in which what Varela is after is like exactly this kind of common language, and that's this thing that's supposed to exist in this non-dual space, um, which is where I think this reimagining cybernetics work is particularly interesting, um, and like these different ways of doing math. Um, but so it's finding like new avenues of communication, these generative passages, um, and again, what Varela is after, like the version of this, is a much like stranger, more like um, I don't know, more like just unconventional way of understanding these things than what when you end up writing a paper about how to unify the cognitive sciences. Like um, there's only so much getting back to the point that I've mentioned a few times, like there's only so much you can say and you can theorize about. There's an aspect of it though that needs to be put into practice, um, and that's like a missing piece of of 4E in a lot of other contexts, I think.
And I think that ties well with what happened to cognitive science, the paper by Nunez, who was basically saying, well, did we ever go in did it which I think if I remember correctly, its core is more of a critique of the cognitive science project broadly, and not even the Martini critique of did we actually get the 4 E's and the embodiment down.
it's like cognitive science was initially driven by this like quite simple observation that like the mind and world overlap, to use Thompson's phrase, or that the mind and body is a mixed object, to use the phrase that's later in this paper. Um, but it's like in order to do science, you have to start going down the wrong path. And you have to like value the third personal over the first personal or whatever. And then there's a way of doing phenomenology that goes down like the wrong path, by which I mean a path that isn't going to lead to like fruitful dialogue between the two. So Voros talks about like the extreme of neuroreductionism, which is what like basically all science and even I think largely cognitive science is now. And that's the term Fuchs uses too, is neuroreductionist. So there's that on one side, and then there's like transcendentalism or something on the phenomenological side. I was less familiar with that. I think he had like particular continental lines of philosophy in mind.
Sure. I feel like we're probably moving further down the paper, but I don't know where we are yet. If you're referencing that here, or if that's just side comment, I don't know. I just want to show it if you're talking about it.
I don't know if there's more to show. He just says, yeah, there's basically extremes on the third personal side and on the first personal side.
And I couldn't actually differentiate if you were referencing the paper or like basically like recapping what we've done in the group, because like yeah, like that's kind of, it's like here's like I think that frames it well. And like part of why I'm doing this brief aside, part of the whole person study stuff and part of everything I just really awkwardly waded through is realizing like, yeah, there's like much broader implications here than like, what happens in my personal very very subjective 1P path of this. It was like I started with what happened in cybernetics and kind of was like, okay. And then it became what happened to cognitive science. And then what happened to cognitive science is like the real, like the bigger question behind all that is like all of this really big mess of stuff we're talking about that's like unpleasantly creeping out from all the different corners of woodworks. And it's like, what do you do with that? So I really like I think, at least for what you were just saying, and I feel kind of bad, like I interrupted you or like trying to reference the paper properly, but I think what you're saying is really a nice sort of, not jumping off point, but maybe like juxtaposition, articulating the juxtaposition that's happening. Not initially, and I think even in the sense that I think that juxtaposition, or at least the argument, and maybe it's best to say the argument that's being presented here in the paper, I don't know if it's really your argument, but at least the one that I think we're talking about, like I think that's a really great, much like we wanted a nice critique of, I don't know, Varela's neurophenomenology as a whole, which is I think what this paper is getting at, and we kind of were like, oh, the hopes and despairs paper is, we would like a better version of that. I think what we're getting at here is sort of, I think this framework that's being presented will be kind of another version of the hopes and despairs paper, in that I'm really interested in good critiques of that framing too. Like I'd be really interested to see what are the ways that doesn't account for what's happening, if that makes sense. So anyway, let's.
Yeah, I guess I have something it's kind of I'm thinking about here. Like we talk about these sort of resonant or generative passages and how the body represents that. So I guess, I think from a philosophical point of view, I'm not really that familiar with what's going on, but I mean, I know computationally what would that look like. So I'm thinking about like if we were to use a computational model to describe some of these things, and we've done this with, we can of course describe to some extent the brain or the mind as a connectionist model, and it has its uses and its maybe its drawbacks. But then how would we move out from that and talk about maybe like this relationship between the body and the environment and the brain in a computational sense? So say we were like, sitting there wanting to develop an analog of like a connectionist network, but we said this is not just the brain but the body, because the whole idea of a connectionist network is to say the brain is this highly interconnected organ that there's information processing, and we can like abstract away a lot of the anatomical detail, although sometimes that leaves us with something to be desired, but we can do practical things with it. So I'm thinking about like Breitenberg vehicles maybe is one attempt at that, although it's not framed in that way ever, although we've kind of framed it that way in our group. And maybe that's not necessarily the best way to think about it. Yeah, metabrains might be another way, although that's part of it maybe. But there's something here that like we if we have a new view of cognitive science, one of the other projects of cognitive science is to have like a computational recasting of maybe like neuroscience, or have like a computational recasting of cognitive psychology, where in cognitive psychology you're interested in the brain and these tasks that you're trying to do, and then in cognitive science maybe you kind of pull the computational value out of that. And I know that like there is like sort of a sometimes we think of like what we're talking about as anti-computationalist, but maybe we don't want to go there, because maybe there's some value in having a computational aspect to some of the embodied, the 4E stuff, the stuff that Varela's talking about, and so forth. I don't really have an answer for that right now, but I'd like to think about that a little bit more. And I think like some of the stuff we're doing, I think goes in that direction, although we're not doing that explicitly. We haven't put down the gauntlet on that explicitly and said this is the way to like build a computational model of the 4E's and some of these phenomenological things. So
I like I appreciate the emphasis on like computational,
yeah.
Because I think so sorry, I'm like skipping ahead in the paper, but these three braids of naturalizing phenomenology, one of them, oh man, this is really far down, sorry, page 73.
Got it.
The author gives some specific examples of what this practice in this like non-dual generative space or whatever, like actually what could this look like, and the first one he talks about is math, the formal mathematical pole, at towards the bottom of 73, and that's where I think that this so like I like the word recasting also. I think that's a great word for this. Formalizing is maybe another good word, and that's the word that Voros uses. So developing, the emphasis on here is the need to develop and utilize tools that would allow us to formalize both neural and phenomenological levels of investigation. So formalization as a necessary step in the third personal world and in the first personal world to finding the overlap between the two. So like whatever data you gather through phenomenal reduction, like translating that into concepts, into like an ontology, into language, that also applies to things that are observable in through the scientific method. The idea, in short, is to make generative passages between eidetic structures attained by phenomenological analysis, the first personal stuff, and neurobiological structures attained by dynamical analysis. Like, I think that's just, one example of third personal stuff, both expressible in mathematical terms. And for the same, I think for the same reasons he's talking about math here, you could say that like cybernetics or systems theory, these things that are like appropriately general and abstract, those could be, and they are being applied in science. But what would it look like to apply those methods in like first personal investigation? And then that, like, once you have something like that, this formalization, you can have better dialogue between the first personal and the third personal.
Yes.
There needs to be a.
Oh, so the second part here, the mechanical neurobiological pole, is also something that, this is more like if I were to build a computational model, and this holds true for like connectionism as well. Does it map to like kind of the mechanisms we're seeking out in the brain, in the body, or in the environment? And he talks here about this sensory motor loop, which of course is the basis for, in part, Bradenburg vehicles. It's also very commonly used. Sensory motor coupling is very commonly used in a lot of models of sort of embodiment because it's the easiest one to kind of track and understand the relationships. So in sensory motor coupling, you have this natural feedback loop that's somewhat easy to understand. I mean, there are feedback loops with learning and memory, but they're not as easy to sort of characterize with sensory motor interaction, sensory motor loops. Those are kind of explicitly stated by the neurobiology, not necessarily just by our models. And so you can actually characterize it pretty easily. And so this is something that, also probably needs to be in place if we want to, kind of bridge the gap between these kind of approaches, but also kind of, make it accessible to maybe like a cognitive scientist on the go who wants to do something with robotics or with, maybe your average embodied intelligence workshop attendee, where they want to know, why is this important to me, in my work? And okay, we have some of these aspects of formalization, some of these aspects of building like something that's explicitly links to the nervous system, and there you go.
Can you? I was mentally occupied by something just before you started talking about like making it relevant to the embodied intelligence workshop. Like you made a certain point about connecting something, and I think I know what it is, but it blanks on me. So could you like say that again a little bit?
Oh yeah. So like I said, if we like focus on the sensory motor loop, we can make that neurobiologically explicit, but it also links back to some very simple models in the cognitive science literature. It's something people are familiar with. And so if I want to link this to cognitive science, I need to appeal to this interface with like computation. So we need to have some sort of computational model that it maybe doesn't rival connectionism, but is similar to, can maybe fit into connectionism, or can be understood in the same way. We can say connectionism is this abstraction of the nervous system, but it doesn't have like an embodied component. It doesn't have any sort of experiential component, etc. And then with our model, it might be based on the sensory motor loop, which is very easy to understand in terms of the inputs and outputs. I mean, with learning and memory, you have like, okay, you have to take some observation, you have to code it, retrieve it. There's short-term and long-term memory. With sensory motor loop, it's like you have inputs, and then there's a response in the motor system, and then we can measure that and say, we could build like a robot or, a very simple model and say, with this much input, we get this much output. We can answer questions about, nonlinearity or linearity, and we can see like maybe how that contributes to, the phenomena itself. So I mean, there are a lot of advantages to doing that, with as opposed to something like consciousness, which is like people can't even define what it is half the time, much less how that is structured computationally or whatever. So that's what I was getting at. You got to
Right.
pick your system, you know.
Well, yeah, and there was something I want to drag that consciousness book like that later, but more importantly than that is I think there was something that came to my mind when you were explaining how appealing to interfacing with computation isn't a rival connectionism, but can act as a almost a I don't know which way to say it, but almost like a plugin that allows you to interface with this.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the question of like bigger question, macro question that kind of is like stated in different ways, but I'm going to say it this way. How do we not lose the merits of what we've learned via various reductionisms, right? Like that's kind of the Peaksian question to some extent that he led to that and saying we kind of like, okay, well, what do we do? What do we do with these things that have? What are these like juncture points that say, well, we have this data and it's somewhat relevant, it's not complete, but what do we do with that? And it's almost like making these. I think it's sort of the space between, and this is maybe personal. Everything I say is, but like there's sort of the element of what things are totally untenable and need a complete revolution of ideas and thoughts about, which I would say is not many, or like that's an extreme take, like we're gonna redo everything. And I think it's valid. I say it's I don't really like to want to stay there, but I feel like there has to kind of I think intellectually there has to be room for the whole structure needs to be torn down because we can't build upon it any further. Like there's a, a space for that to be a thing. But I don't think that's where most of the work needs to be done necessarily. And then there's sort of what are you doing with these different points of interface about it? And I have something very nice to say here, but it's fading out. To go back to what Bradley said, yes, I very much appreciate that being said that way, and I think the plugins I don't really like it as a word.
Well, I mean, I originally was trying to address the sociology question that Moros brought up, but it also raises this issue of like what's methodologically compatible, and like what is easy for people to say. Well, that's useful to me. I can maybe use it in the same way I use a connectionist model, or it improves upon the connectionist model in a certain way. So you're not just saying, well, you just need to give it the program. You're saying this is useful in the same ways that a cognitive science set of cognitive science models would be useful.
I think I know what you mean, but I think that's only like worth caring about, like how easily it could be integrated or related to another view, a novel view. How well a novel view could be like synthesized or integrated, connected, whatever, to a previous view. That only matters insofar as we think the current paradigm, the previous view, is like worth worth keeping alive. So I guess that's just one thought I had reading this paper, because I guess going back to Jesse's comment of like, we don't have to throw away all of scientific progress, right? Like I think maybe for Varela that would be kind of an open question, even as like himself a scientist, because I'm looking at the bottom of page 67. It is, according to Varela, only when we start taking lived experience seriously that a reflective space opens up, which allows us to unearth and investigate many fundamental, if often tacit, presuppositions guiding our scientific inquiries, the most important among which is the subject-object divide. So these, tacit, real deep assumptions about the world, one of which is the subject-object divide. That's pretty deep. That we're going pretty far back with where we think if we think some of science needs to like start again, you can think that about, I don't know, genetics, or you could think that about our concept of matter. And the language here kind of communicates that it might be like really, I keep wanting to say far back, because I guess both temporally, like when, like just the history of thought, but also just like how deep, deeply ingrained some of these assumptions are. Maybe even those are ones that need to be questioned, at least when it's merited based off of our first personal experiences. Also, this in that passage, I saw a connection to just these interests in like natural philosophy and what happened to that, because that seems like an alternative way of seeing like how we have our present, scientific presuppositions. And if you, look at the history of ideas and you see these developments through time, you can realize like just how much of our current scientific practice is contingent, to use Weiner's word.
I would add to that, just for, I think everybody here knows this, but just like for posterity, speaking to the audience of like future selves that don't remember what I'm saying right now, is like what's particularly pressing to me about what Amanda just said in a nice way of recapturing some of my own thoughts, so thank you. But also like actually what we're discussing is, I noticed a very particularly, there's a really weird tension between, and this is kind of why I was so cautious about saying stuff earlier, is that I am interested in that, but I also feel like so much of the commentary I've seen that's in that of the same discussion, or at least similar sounding, like it tends to be, oh, we should just go back to how it was, like a very sort of conservative, past perfect view on a lot of like doing a lot of things. Not necessarily that like we should ditch science, but more like I feel like there's a lot of a very a sort of pressure or compression of nuance away from nuance in the space of like going like there's nothing to be gleaned from going backwards unless you're going to be like really conservative in the backwards view. And I don't know, there's something I really want to articulate about that, but I can't right now. But I feel like yes, there's something in that space that I think is tied to this. And it's funny, because to go back to Varela specifically and reading the interview in the book, which I actually also happen to have at arm's length, like all this stuff is at arm's length for me today, so I feel really big time nerd points. But like going back to the end of Varela's talk about stuff, and just like the way he even concluded the thing, which I know I said before, there's like one of the last things is like the interviewer Susan Blackmore was saying at the end of the interview, so you're quite an unusual person because you've combined science and a scientific background with the interest in phenomenology and French background, and also Chilean. So what a study was done for your life, blah, 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 blah. And he says, So in my life, I started out with these two things being completely apart from one another. And now it's hard for me to say who I am and what's more unified, how he's more unified. And then like the question about what he's trying to do and that thing about like I don't know why I'm pushing this so hard. And it's sort of like I feel I think it's such a weird balancing act right now to look at his inclination to do all that stuff and to like go way deep back and look at stuff. And I also realized like I use the language of like I think one of the hardest work of people trying to push anything like actually forward is the fairy tales and of like I don't think I don't think turning everything over from the start is going to be like I kind of wish it was that simple, and I don't think it will be. Like we have to do some of the translational work. At least that's how I feel about it right now. So
Yeah, I think
anyway,
that a lot of this depends on whether you think that the scientific revolution's view is correct. Maybe that's not the way science progresses or progress, intellectual activity progresses. We kind of accept that as like the standard philosophy of science. Maybe that's incorrect. I don't know.
my personal take as around our time is that it's inherently incomplete, yet also has been inevitably necessary for us to do it the wrong way and get the incompleteness first because I just think that's sort of how things work. Like I think we kind of have had to do it, and I think the work a lot of the juxtapositional work is explaining. Oh, here's why we had to be so ignorant, but proceed within the ignorance to build these things out that could be. Hopefully, we just don't like ruin our entire planetary system and everything else in the process. Um, that's to be continued on that front. What a cliffhanger! We're not even done with this paper yet. I don't know how much more you want to read it. This is quite a long paper, but like I'm really enjoying the parts that are coming up from it. But I'll defer to you to Amanda. Like, how much do you want to continue this next time, or
No, we can move on. I think I got all my main thoughts out.
I really want to. I personally want to. I need to read this paper fully and deeply, like a few multiple times, because this is like really getting at. I really like this paper. Like it's pointing out stuff much better than I've been able to, and I feel like I still haven't gotten it. I haven't digested it fully. But yeah, like there's other stuff ahead, like the coding metaphor. I think would tie really nice with this, and bring a lot everything we just said, and everything like our bigger like hey, did the scientific revolution and its sort of empirical. eh, But I really like some of Rella's like implicit jabs of like, yeah, like by the way, objective data is sort of this particular like just because you close your eyes and say the first person experiences something's there, like it's actually still there. Like he kind of is getting at that, but it's sort of like you know we're dealing with the data, the measuring, and what can we do with that, but also sort of the limitations of that too, and all that fun stuff. So anyway, um, for next time, coding paper, put this here.
Sure.
Review. We should challenge both of us, which is mostly for me. Uh, re- show the documents. Be ready for the documents. Show up and embrace the incompleteness and the criticism of the documents that we face. It's time. It's already here. It's November. It's the month, so we've got to do it. Anything else for next week you want to tag? I think that's a good thing. There's a few other papers that we mentioned, but like the 11th thing is going to be the group. Is there anything up here? Uh, I should aim to do more with project stuff, which is implicit for me and everything else. But yeah. Okay, great. That's it. We're not meeting tomorrow. No Thursday meeting. We have one more meeting for the year. I really appreciate that one meeting for 11 stuff. We'll take a break with the reading group, and then I'll try. I'm sorry I missed the last couple of Saturdays, but I should like show up and really deliver stuff. That'd be big of me to do. Um, Okay, I guess we'll see Saturday. Please mention stuff in Slack because I know I'm like all over the place today. But yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
I'll say goodbye for
See you later.
thanks
See you
everybody.